and therefore the rest of the region, would not have peace if left alone. Rome decided to establish its first permanent foothold in the Greek world, and divided Macedonia into 4 client republics. 109. Yet, Macedonian agitation continued. The Fourth Macedonian War, 150 to 148 BC, was fought against a Macedonian pretender to the throne who was again destabilizing Greece by trying to re-establish the Old Kingdom. The Romans swiftly defeated the Macedonians at the Second Battle of Pydna. The Achaean League, seeing the direction of Roman policy trending towards direct administration, met at Corinth and declared war nominally against Sparta but in reality against Rome. 110. They were swiftly defeated, in 146, the same year as the destruction of Carthage. Corinth was besieged and destroyed, which forced the League's surrender. After nearly a century of constant crisis management in Greece, which always held back to internal instability and war, when she withdrew, Rome decided to divide Macedonia into 2 new directly administered Roman provinces, Achaea and Macedonia. 111. Third Punic War. Carthage never recovered militarily after the Second Punic War, 112. But quickly did so economically, and Third Punic War that followed was in reality a simple punitive mission after the neighboring Numidians allied to Rome robbed and attacked Carthaginian merchants. Treaties had forbidden any war with Roman allies. Viewing defense against banditry as war action, Rome decided to annihilate the city of Carthage. 113. Carthage was almost defenseless, and submitted when besieged. 114. However, the Romans demanded complete surrender and removal of the city into the desert hinterland far from any coastal or harbor region. The Carthaginians refused. The city was besieged, stormed, and completely destroyed. Ultimately, all of Carthage's North African and Iberian territories were acquired by Rome. Punic Carthage was gone, but the other Punic cities in the western Mediterranean flourished under Roman rule. Carthage would eventually be rebuilt by the Romans 100 years later as a Roman colony by order of Julius Caesar. It flourished, becoming one of the largest cities in the Roman Empire, and the largest and most important one in Africa. Social troubles and First Civil War. Views on the structural causes of the Republic's collapse differ. One of the enduring theses is that Rome's expansion destabilized its social organization between conflicting interests. The Senate's policyholders, blinded by its own short-term self-interest, alienated large portions of society from it, who then joined powerful generals who sought to overthrow the system. 115. 2 other theses have challenged this thesis. The first notices that nobody actively sought the destruction of the Republic. In fact, politicians clung ever harder to the traditional political system in its waning years, but pins blame on the Romans' inability to conceive of alternatives to the traditional republican system. 116. The second instead stresses the continuity of the Republic, until its disruption by Caesar's civil war, and the following 2 decades of civil war created conditions for autocratic rule and made return to the Republic impossible. In this view, civil war caused the fall of the Republic, not vice versa. 117. A core cause of the Republic's eventual demise was the loss of elites' cohesion from c. 133 BC. The ancient sources called this moral decay from wealth and the hubris of Rome's domination of the Mediterranean. 118. Modern sources have proposed multiple causes of elite cohesion, including wealth inequality and a growing unwillingness by aristocrats to transgress political norms, especially in the aftermath of the social war. 119. 120. The Gracchi. In the winter of 138-37, a first slave uprising, known as the First Servile War, broke out in Sicily. After initial successes, The slaves led by Eunice and Clean were defeated by Empipana and P. Rupilius in 132 BC. 121. In this context, Tiberius Gracchus was elected plebeian tribune in 133 BC. He attempted to enact a law to limit the amount of land that any individual could own and establish a commission, on which Gracchus and members of his family would sit, distribute to public lands to poor rural plebs. 122. The aristocrats, hostile to lose an enormous amount of money, were bitterly opposed to this proposal. Tiberius submitted this law to the plebeian council, but the law was vetoed by a fellow tribune named Marcus Octavius. 123. Tiberius induced the plebs to depose Octavius from his office on the justification that Octavius acted contrary to the manifest will of the people, a position that was unprecedented and constitutionally dubious. Sad Smiley 124, carried to its logical end. This theory would remove all constitutional restraints on the popular will, and put the state under the absolute control of a temporary popular majority. 125. His law was enacted and took effect, but, when Tiberius ostentatiously stood for re-election to the tribunate, he was deliberately murdered by a faction in the Senate. 128. Tiberius' brother Gaius was elected tribune 10 years later in 123 and re-elected for 122. Recalling the memory of his brother, he induced the plebs to reinforce rights of appeal to the people against capital extrajudicial punishments and institute reforms to improve the welfare of the people. While the ancient sources tend to conceive Gracchus' legislation as an elaborate plot against the authority of the Senate, he showed no sign of wanting to replace the Senate in its normal functions. 129. Amid wide-ranging and popular reforms to create grain subsidies, change jury pools, establish and require the Senate to assign provinces before elections, Gaius then proposed a law which would grant citizenship rights to Rome's Italian allies. 130. This last proposal was not popular with the plebeians and he lost much of his support. He stood for election to a third term in 121 but was defeated. During violent protests over repeal of an allies' colonization bill, the Senate moved the Senatus Consultum Ultimum against him, resulting in his death, with many others, on the Aventine. 131. His legislation, like that of his brother, survived. The Roman aristocracy disliked the Gracchese agitation but acceded to their policies. 132. In 121, the province of Gallia Narbonensis was established after the victory of Quintus Fabius Maximus over a coalition of Arverni and Allobroges in southern Gaul. 123. The city of Narbo was founded there in 118 by Lucius Licinius Crassus. Rise of Marius. Bust, traditionally identified as Gaius Marius, instigator of the Marian reforms. The Juguthine War of 111-104 was fought between Rome and the North African kingdom of Numidia, in current-day Algeria and Tunisia. In 118, its king, Micipsa, died. He was succeeded by two legitimate sons, Adherbal and Hyempsal, and an illegitimate son Jugutar. Micipsa divided his kingdom between these three sons upon his death. Jugutar, however, turned on his brothers, killing Hyempsal and driving Adherbal out of Numidia. While Jugutar usurped the throne, Adherbal fled to Rome for assistance. 133. Numidia had been a loyal ally of Rome since the Punic Wars. 135. Initially, Rome mediated a division of the country between the two brothers. However, Jugutar eventually renewed his offensive, leading to a long and inconclusive war with Rome. He also bribed several Roman commanders, and at least 2 tribunes, before and during the war. 136. His nemesis, Gaius Marius, a legate from a virtually unknown provincial family, returned from the war in Numidia and was elected consul in 107 over the objections of the aristocratic senators, relying on support from the businessmen and poor. Marius had the Numidian command reassigned to himself by plebiscite and, with the capture of Jugutar at the end of a long campaign, ended the war. In the aftermath, the Romans largely withdrew from the province after installing a client king. 137, Marius' victory played on existing themes of senatorial corruption and incompetence, contrasted especially against the military failure of senatorial leadership in the Cimbric War. 138. Denarius of Faustus Cornelius Sulla 56 BC. It shows Diana on the obverse, while the reverse depicts Sulla being offered an olive branch by his ally Bocchus I Jugurtharis Hound captive on the right. 134. The Juguthine War constituted the final Roman pacification of northern Africa. 139, after which Rome largely ceased expansion in the continent after reaching natural barriers of desert and mountain. The Cimbrian War, 113-101, was a far more serious affair than the Gallic clashes in 121. The Germanic tribes of the Cimbrian, the Teutons, 140, migrated from northern Europe into Rome's northern territories, 141, and clashed with Rome and her allies. The defeat of various aristocrats in the conflict, along with Marius' reputation for military victory, led to his holding 5 successive consulships with little to enable him to lead armies against the threat. 142, at the Battle of Aquae Sextii and the Battle of Vercellae, Marius led the Roman armies which virtually annihilated both tribes, ending the threat. 143, during the Cimbric War, further conflicts embroiled the Republic. A second servile war waged in Sicily from 104 to 101. Winking Sad Smiley 121, a campaign was waged against pirates in Cilicia. Rome campaigned in Thrace, adding lands to the province of Macedonia, and Laconia was annexed to Rome. 144, First Civil Wars. In 91, the social war broke out between Rome and its former allies in Italy. The main causes of the war were a Roman encroachment on Allied lands due to the Republic's land redistribution programs, harsh Roman treatment of the non-citizen allies, and Roman unwillingness to share in the spoils of the empire won by Roman and Italian arms. 145, after the assassination, in Rome, of a conservative tribune Hosub to grant the Italians citizenship, the Allies took up arms. Sad Smiley 146, most ancient writers explain the conflict in terms of demands for full citizenship. However, contemporary rebel propaganda coins indicate it may have been a primarily anti-Roman secessionist movement. 147, the Romans, in the event, were able to stave off military defeat by conceding the main point almost immediately, tripling the number of artisans. 148. More recent scholarship also has stressed the importance of the war on the Allies in destabilizing Roman military affairs by blurring the distinction between Romans and foreign enemies. Sad Smiley 149. It may as well be argued that the social war created the self-seeking unprincipled soldier as the converse. 150. Further civil conflict emerged, starting in 88. One of the consuls that year, L. Cornelius Sulla, was assigned to take an army against the Pontic king Mithridates. The local governor there was defeated. However, C. Marius induced a tribune to promulgate legislation reassigning Sulla's command to Marius. Sulla responded by suborning his army, marching on Rome. The city was undefended but politically outraged, and declaring Marius and 11 of his allies outlaws before departing east to war with Mithridates. 151. Marius, who had escaped into exile, returned, and with L. Cornelius Cinna, took control of the city. 152. After the Marians took control of the city, they started to purge their political enemies. 153. They elected, in irregular fashion, Marius and Cinna to the consulship of 86 BC. Marius, however, died a fortnight after assuming office. Cinna took control of the state. His policies are unclear and the record is muddled by Sulla's eventual victory. 154. The Cinnan regime declared Sulla a public enemy and ostensibly replaced Hymen command in the east. Instead of cooperating with his replacement, which Sulla viewed as illegitimate, he made peace with Mithridates and prepared to return to Italy. 155. By 85 BC, the Cinnans in Rome started preparations to defend the peninsula from invasion. 155. In 83, he returned from the east with a small but experienced army. 156. Initial reactions were negative across the peninsula, but after winning a number of victories he was able to overcome resistance and capture the city. In the Battle of the Colline Gate, just outside Rome, 157, Sulla's army defeated the Marian defenders and then proceeded to run riot, killing for profit, pleasure, or personal vengeance anyone they pleased. 158. He then instituted procedures to centralize the killing, creating lists of prescribed persons who could be killed for their property without punishment. 159. After establishing political control, Sulla had himself made dictator and passed a series of constitutional reforms intended to strengthen the position of the magistrates and the Senate in the state and replace custom with new rigid statute laws enforced by new permanent courts. 160. 161. Sulla resigned the dictatorship in 81 after election as consul for 80. He then retired and died 78 BC. 162. Sullan Republic. During Sulla's civil war, C.N. Pompey Magnus had served as a young general under Sulla's overall command. He served the Sullan regime during a short conflict triggered by the Republic's own consul, M. Aemilius Lepidus, in 77 BC, 163, and afterwards led troops successfully against the remaining anti-Sullan forces in the Sertorian War. He brought the war successfully to a close in 72 BC. While Pompey was in Spain, the Republic faced agitation both foreign and domestic. The main domestic political struggle was the restoration of tribunician powers stripped during Sulla's dictatorship. 164. After rumors of a pact between Sertrius' ostensible republic in exile, 165, Mithridates, and various Mediterranean pirate groups, the Sullan regime feared encirclement and stepped up efforts against their threats. They reinforced Pompey in Spain and fortified Bithynia. In spring 73 BC, Mithridates did so, invading Bithynia. 166. In 73, a slave uprising started in southern Italy under Spartacus, a gladiator, who defeated the local Roman Aricans and 4 legions under the consuls of 72. 167. At the head of some 70,000 men, Spartacus led them in a third servile war. They sought freedom by escape from Italy before being defeated by troops raised by M. Licinius Crassus. 168. After the slaves were defeated by Crassus and then Pompey, who was returning to Rome from Spain, they bickered over who deserved credit. 169. Although Pompey and Crassus were rivals, they were elected to a joint consulship in 70. During their consulship they brought legislation to dismantle with little opposition the tribunician disabilities imposed by Sulla's constitutional reforms. 170. They also shepherded legislation to settle the contentious matter of juriform. 171. L. Licinius Lucullus, one of Sulla's most able lieutenants, had fought against Mithridates during the First Mithridatic War before Sulla's civil war. Mithridates also had fought Rome in a second Mithridatic